Hey everyone, my name is Eric Brinkman. I am the product director for the dev section here at GitLab. And today I'm going to go through a quick walkthrough of the dev section features. As part of our Q4 OKRs, we're asking each of the stages at GitLab to do a product walkthrough outlining some key features. And so we have individual walkthroughs coming for the manage, plan, and create stages sometime next week. But I also thought it would be a unique experience to just focus holistically on the dev walkthrough. And so I haven't prepped a ton for this. And I think that's probably a good thing because the more organic this walkthrough is, I think the more I'll likely find as a source of friction through the process. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have an idea of a script in my mind that we're going to walk through today. So I'm going to share my screen, I'm going to share my browser, and we'll walk through this together. I'll give you an overview of the dev section. Okay, so as you can already see, I'm already logged in to gitlab.com. And I'm going to start by making a group. And a group is a really important construct inside of GitLab that lets you organize people. And so in order to make a new group, I guess I have to click on your groups first. Potentially we should add a add group button here. But I'm going to click on new group and I'm going to call it EB test group 2. It looks like this will auto-generate my URL. I can give it a description, Eric's second test group. I'm not going to choose a group avatar, and then I'm just going to go ahead and make this public in typical GitLab adherence to our core value of transparency. And go ahead and create this group. So I've created a group. A group is a collection of several projects and subgroups and members, and I'm just going to go ahead and add a member. So I do that over here on the sidebar by adding a member. And just because I was talking to Gabe about some things, I'm going to add him. I'm going to give him a level of permission. And so we have 5 levels of permissions inside of GitLab, ranging from guest at the low end to owner at the top end. And I want him to be a maintainer, which will pretty much give him access to do most things inside the group. And then I'm going to send him an invite. If I wanted to, I could also set an expiration date, but as this is just a test, I'm going to leave it for now. I can also change his permissions over here, put the expiration date here as well, and then remove him if I wanted to, because I am an owner. Now, we haven't done anything yet. I've just set up kind of this container for people to be added. So I've added myself and Gabe. And I think what I want to do now is I want to start making some projects. And I can do that here in the group overview tab by saying new project. And I can say Eric's web app. And very similar from the group creation screen. The project creation screen looks pretty similar as well. I'll also make this public and I will initialize it with a README. And what this is going to do is it's going to make a new project in the EB test group 2 group namespace, and you can see the URL here. It's pretty simple. I can also see the breadcrumbs at the top of the page to understand where I am pretty much at all times. And what it drops me into here is essentially the project overview page, which really shows me a lot of pertinent details about the project and the repository. As with most source control products, you can do things like star a project. If I wanted to star that, other people could star it as well. I could fork it into another namespace, and I also could clone it via SSH or HTTPS. There's some nice little stats here, number of commits, number of branches, tags, and then the size of the repository, and then also the branch that I'm taking a look at. I can also add new files, upload files, create a new directory, and then of course create new branches and tags here. I can see the history of the repository, and then I can also go into our web IDE straight from the repository which is a really cool feature I'll be walking through in a little bit. So right now, this is just a blank project. It's not super useful. So let's go ahead and actually make something that's a little bit more realistic in terms of an actual project. So gitlab.com, I'm going to go to my personal namespace where I know I already have a project that works. And just what I'm looking at is a very simple static site that I've made with Hugo, and it's deployed to GitLab pages, which you can find pages down here in the settings. And you can also see this is the URL for my pages. So if I click on this, it's going to take me to my Hugo page, which is hosted here on GitLab pages. And so the reason that I went to this project is because let's say I'm browsing GitLab projects, which you can do here under Explore Projects, and I see Hugo. And I think that's a really cool project. I'd love to fork that to build my own static site. So you just go up here and click Fork. And it's going to give me all of the namespaces that I could fork this project to. And you can see that these two are already blue. And the reason they're already blue is because I've already forked them to those namespaces. But remember, we just created this new group. So I'm going to fork it to this new group. So all I do is simply click here, forking the project. Forking is now in progress. And as soon as that's done, you can see it's navigated me to the new group where I forked the project into the actual project itself. Now, one thing about forking is if you go into Settings, General, and then you scroll to the bottom to Advanced, you can see that this is a fork and it has a fork relationship. And if I wanted to, I could remove that fork relationship. If I click here, I'll get a pop-up. I'd have to actually type in some text to confirm that I wanted to remove that fork relationship because it cannot be reestablished. And I could do that. I'm not going to do that. You'd get the same pop-up if you wanted to remove the project. And then also a cool feature that we have is when you remove a project, it just places it into a read-only state for a given amount of days. So it's like a soft delete, and you can restore it in case you didn't actually mean to. But you have to be very intentional to remove a project because there's so many things that you have to do in order to do that. So now we have our project forked to my own group. And I can see in the repository view, these are the various files that Hugo has. And now I'm not really a Hugo expert, so to speak, but I have gotten this site working. And I know, just because I know GitLab pages, that in order to actually get this thing to show up on GitLab pages, I have to run a special CI job. And you can find out how to do this here on our GitLab pages documentation. But just for now, I know that I need to go kick off this job, which will essentially deploy to GitLab pages. So I'm just going to go ahead and kick that off and run this job, which is called pages here. And I can see it viewing here if you care. But since that's outside the scope of the dev section, we'll hop back into dev section things. Now, going back into the repository, you can see a bunch of different things. Obviously, we have the files. You can also view the commits. And now remember, this is a fork. So I'm going to get all the commits from the fork as well. All of the branches, you can see that looks like there's one open branch other than master. Master has these tags. It's the default branch, and it's also protected. And a protected branch inside of GitLab affords you certain cautions and certain guarantees on who can do things to that branch. You can set up merge request approvals that people can only merge that to that branch. And it's a nice way to essentially keep your master a little bit cleaner and obviously to have a little bit more control over who can do things with that particular branch. You can also see who's contributed to this project. And since I've forked from a fork, there's probably a lot of people here that have contributed to the project. You can see the graph. This isn't a feature that I use a lot. But you can kind of see how, essentially what the Git branch and merge graph looks like. So you can see that we're a pretty linear path here. And then we'll go and make an MR in a little bit and come back and see what this graph looks like. I'm going to go ahead and move on to issues because planning is a huge part of any software development lifecycle or any new product creation. I'm going to just simply make a new issue. And let's say I'm going to change the title, change title of blog. I'm going to give this issue a description. Please change the title of the blog to Eric Brinkman's awesome blog. Our issue description box is essentially a markdown editor. So you can see here that this is essentially markdown, and then you can click here to see the rendered markdown. So if you're familiar with markdown, all of the basics are here. And if you need help, you can also use the buttons here if you wanted to insert a link, make a quote, italicize, or bold text as well. We also have this thing called quick actions inside of GitLab. And so if I, for example, wanted to add a label, which I actually don't have any labels yet, so this isn't going to work, but we'll go do that in a second. I could do that with text as well. I can check if this issue is going to be confidential, and if so, it'll only be visible to team members with at least reporter access. I'm going to assign this to myself for now. And then we will fill out the rest of this stuff a little bit later. So I'm going to go ahead and submit this issue. Okay, so we now have our first issue, which is essentially saying that we want to change the title of the blog. I'm going to thumbs up this issue, which is a nice way to understand if an issue is popular. And then maybe I'll say, hey, Gabe, would you mind helping me with this? And I could also edit the assignee if I wanted to. You can have multiple assignees as well. And then these other sidebar things we'll come back to after I make them. So let's talk about labels for a second. Labels are a really powerful construct inside of GitLab that lets you essentially tag issues and merge requests, and then you can filter, sort, and then modify boards based off of those labels as well. So we'll get into that. So let's make a label. We have two types of labels. We have just general labels that are used for tagging, and then we have scoped labels, which essentially are a key value pair that are explicit in terms of the pair that you link to the key. And I'll talk about both of these in a second. So let's just make a label that says feature. So we want new features, and this label is used for new features. I can give it a color if I want, but I'm just going to go ahead and create that label. So now you can see that I have my feature label. I'll go ahead and prioritize that label so I can make sure it's stuck to the top of the list. And I'm going to also make a scoped label, priority 1. And now what I've done is I've made a scope label. So I need to make another label with a priority 2, create label. And essentially what these labels are is exclusive labels. So if I apply a priority 1 label to an issue, and then later I change or I add the priority 2 label, it will automatically remove the priority 1. So you can never have more than one scoped label on an issue. And so let's go back to our issue and apply some labels. And actually, let's make these a different color. So I'll go back to our issue list here, back into our issue. And I'm going to apply the feature label, and I'm going to apply the priority label. And you can see that this, the issue description comments, the system notes appeared automatically because I added these labels. Now, let's say we determine offline that this is actually a priority 2 feature. So I'm gonna apply the priority 2. You can see it automatically removed the priority 1 label, and I can never have both of those labels applied to this issue at the same time. I can also give the issue a weight. Let's say I give it a weight of 3. I can lock the issue. I can make it confidential. I can set a due date. I can track time against it via a quick action. And the quick action, let's actually pull up the, with estimate and spend. So let's say I've spent 30. Oh, I've spent 3 days and 6 hours and 30 minutes. Okay, that could probably be a little bit more intuitive on adding the M and the H and the D. Let's go ahead and add a second issue, and then we're going to go over to boards. And we'll make this one change color of blog background. Please change the color of the blog background. And I'm going to assign this one to Gabe. And we'll make this a feature and a priority 1. So I've now have an issue. Oops, now you can see I have a typo here, thankfully. I can edit that very quickly, save the change, and now I'm back in business with respect to a decent title. So I now have 2 issues in this project. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these issues on a board. So I just clicked on boards, and for the very first time. And what you'll see when you go to boards for the first time is the ability to add default lists to your issue board, or you can just say, never mind, use my own. And if you click this add default list, what it's going to do, it's going to make 2 columns, doing and to do. And so let's go ahead and do that right now, because there's a whole bunch of ways to slice and dice boards, and it's a really cool feature. And what that did is it made 2 labels in my system called to do and doing. So if I go over to labels, I can now see doing and to do here. And how a board works is when you drag cards over from the open column into a column with a label, it's going to apply that label to the card. And when you move it from one list to another with respect from to do to doing, it's going to remove one of those and it's going to add the other. And I'm not sure why that's another thing we should fix. You can see that it actually has added the labels over here, but it's not showing up over here. And so I'm going to try to refresh it to see if that shows up again, and it looks like it doesn't. So let's move it back into to do. And you can see that the label did update over here, but it hasn't updated on the card. And so that's something we should go and address. So I'm going to move maybe changing the color of the background into doing and changing the title of blog into to do. If you click on the white space of a card, you will pull in the sidebar of the issue from the right, so you can edit some of the sidebar. And then you can also remove it from the board if you wanted to. When an issue gets closed, it goes off of a board completely. And so if I drug this card into this closed column, it would actually close the issue. And so that can be really useful if you're managing a team that's using Kanban or something along those lines. But labels aren't the only things you can actually do to have board lists. You can have a whole bunch of other board lists as well. And so what I'm going to do to show that is I'm going to just make a new board. So I'm going to click on the drop down here and click create new board. I'm going to say, this is my assignee board. Assignee board. And this way, what this will let me do is it'll let me see all the work that's assigned to the various people I have on the project. So in this case, it's just me and Gabe. And so I'm going to make a list that can show each of us our work very easily. So I'm going to say, okay, this is my assignee board. I'm not going to limit the board scope right now because I want to see all issues, but say if I wanted to see just issues that were P1s, for example, I could limit the scope of the board to any issue that just had this label, which would just let me see maybe issues that were assigned to Gabe and myself that only were priority 1. Boards are very flexible and customizable this way. So please play around with it and let us know if you have any ideas or any thoughts. So I'm gonna go ahead and create this board. It's not going to be scoped. So it's gonna show me both of those issues. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a list, a board list. I'm gonna click over here, board list, and I can make lists based off of labels, assignees, or milestones. And I wanna make them based off of assignee. And so I wanna make a list for me. So you can see I've made a list for myself, and the issue that is assigned to me has automatically moved over there. I'm also going to make a list for Gabe. And you can see that both of the issues here moved over here. And so unlike the last board that we had, an issue can be in multiple places on this board because it's an assignee board. So boards are very powerful to use to just understand assignees. They're very powerful to use to understand how work flows if you're using like a Kanban methodology. And then you can also use them just to see like directionally roadmap from a roadmap perspective. If you wanted to make a board by milestone to see, hey, what's in my next release and the release after that and the release after that, it's very, very easy to make a board that can show that. So let's go into our project and let's actually make a change here. So I have this repository. I've said I want to make a few changes based off of issues. How do I actually do that? Well, we have this really cool project or feature built into the product called our web IDE. And if you're a developer, you most likely use a local IDE, but if you want to make a very quick change to code, and let's say you're on the go, or you aren't at your workstation where everything's set up, we have a really cool integration or a feature built into the product called our web IDE, where you can make changes and you can commit and you can make an MR very, very quickly to make that change back into the master branch or whatever branch you need to go to. So over here to the left, there is a file browser that will allow you to view files. And this is very clearly a reference out to the Big Lebowski. But we said we wanted to edit the blog title. Let's just go ahead and say, maybe there's multiple Erics working on this blog, and so I wanted to say Eric Brinkman. So because this is a markdown, you can also preview the markdown here by clicking on this tab. But I've made a change, and you can see that there's a change here. There's a change here that's unstaged and not yet committed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the commit button, and I'm going to create a new branch. I'm just going to say EB update name. I'm going to give it a commit message and say update Eric's last name on this post. And then I'm also going to make sure that this button here is checked. And I'm not going to commit directly to the master branch because that's just not a great practice. And so I want to make a new branch, and then I'm going to merge that branch back into my master branch as a way of essentially using a best practice for my development flow. So you can see that I've the web IDE will automatically stage all changes. So I've staged this change, and I am going to commit to the new branch. Now what that does is it's going to make a merge request, or it's going to push to the branch. It's going to create a branch, push to the branch, and then drop us in the merge request creation screen. Now, because I've forked from our project, I actually need to modify the branches that I'm going to merge into, because by default, it's going to take my merge request and it's going to submit it as an MR against the project that I forked from, which makes sense, and that's a common development flow, but that's not what I want to do here. What I want to do here is actually merge back into my own master branch. And so I can see my source branch is here. That makes sense. My target branch, though, I want to be in the same group, EB test group 2, Hugo. And so we're going to go ahead and compare our branches and do that. And similar to in the issue description, we can give this a description of a merge request, and it says update Eric's last name because we have too many on staff. I'm going to assign this to myself, and I'll give this also that feature and doing label. We have a really neat feature called merge request dependencies. And so if there was another merge request that was dependent on this one, or you could link it here. And essentially what that's going to allow you to do is to map dependencies amongst merge requests, and it'll prevent a merge if another merge request needs to be merged before the merge request you're looking at needs to or can be merged. And so it can be a nice feature for essentially indicating dependencies amongst changes to your code base. We also have approval rules, and I'm not going to add any rules here, but we can specify the number of approvals required and then who actually can approve. And so if I were to click approval rules, it said my rule, number of rules required, I could search from a group or a user and then add a rule. We're not going to do that now. And then there's also some merge options. There's one that's selected by default, which is to delete the source branch where the merge request is accepted, just to clean up after yourself a little bit, and then to squash commits if you're going to have a lot of commits. And so I'm going to go ahead and submit the merge request, and what that's going to do is it's going to actually create the merge request for us. In the merge request creation screen, you can see that we have an overview, which contains the discussion. We have a commits tab, which shows the list of all the commits in that merge request. The pipelines that will automatically run when an MR or a commit happens against an MR, and then also the changes. So this is your diff tab, more or less. And so you can see here that we've made a change. And one thing I want to highlight here is that you can comment on a line on a diff. So if someone's reviewing this in a code review scenario, say it looks good to me, you can add that comment now. You can also make a change very quickly to the actual code itself by using a feature called insert suggestions. So there's this little button here called insert suggestions, and if you do that, it'll copy the line from the diff over. And let's say, for example, I actually used the wrong Eric. So we have another Eric on our team. His last name is Schroeder. Let's say Eric Schroeder was actually the one who's supposed to write this. And so I've changed his name. I'm going to add this comment now. What this comment's going to do is just going to say, hey, I think this is a change you should make on your diff. And if you wanted to, you can actually apply this suggestion right from the diff as well. I'm going to do that by clicking this apply suggestion button. It's going to give it a little badge that says it's applied. And then it's also going to tell me that I just changed this in version 2 of the diff. And so it's a really neat feature for making very small changes and tweaks right in the diff view. Now, if I go back to the overview, you can see that all of that commenting and all of the history of what we just did for that inserting that suggestion is captured here in the issue or in the MR description. And then if I wanted to, I can toggle this to make the thread less noisy. Oops, what's going on here? Okay, so now we have a change. We can merge it. We're merging from this branch into master. I'm going to go ahead and click merge. And you can see that these changes were merged by me just now. We can go back into our repository to see those files. We modified the index file. We can see that Eric's name is here. Now, if we go to our pages setting to grab our URL, we can see that our site is deployed, but it hasn't yet deployed to pages. And so that should be picked up pretty soon. We'll come back and check on that in a little bit. But all in all, that is essentially a run through of the dev section capabilities. There's one other feature I want to highlight as well, which is our design management capabilities. So let's say that we went back to this issue here where we were changing the color of the blog background. We have this tab right here in the middle called Designs. And this is a place for designers to communicate and collaborate with their development teams. I can click this Add Designs button, and I guess we'll just add this one because it's the first picture I can find. And what I can do is I can add a design. If I click on this design, I can actually click around and start a new discussion. Maybe I love this color of translucent orange and say, hey Gabe, I love the look of this translucent orange. It reminds me of the old Macs from, what was that, the early 2000s, I think. And I could comment on this, and he could see comment number 1, point of interest comment here, and then I could also add other comments around the image if I wanted to. I can delete the image, and I can also download the image as well. I can also upload another image with the exact same name, which will give me a version history of those designs. Okay, let's see. I'm not sure why that's not working, but maybe something to improve. We will check on that. Okay, and you can also see that when I added this design and I started a discussion here, that it was provided as system notes out to the rest of the issue description. So a really cool feature that the team's been working on. I'm excited to bring designers alongside the DevOps workflow. So what did we learn? I think there's a few things for me. One, I don't think that versioning designs is super intuitive. If I had a new version of this design, it feels like uploading it with the same name should version it appropriately. I'm gonna try this again. So I think that's one thing. The other thing is I was a little bit surprised to see that the labels were not updating when you drug them. Oh, now it seems to work, but it doesn't work. You can see, oh no, this is an assignee board. Sorry, let's go back to our development board. Yeah, so these labels don't show up here. Curious if this actually works if I were to add another list for feature. You can see there's label inconsistency here. This issue has the doing label. It clearly does not have the doing label on the card, and so on and so forth. So label inconsistency. The other thing that I noticed as well is on an issue, we have this feature to start a merge request or create a new branch straight from the issue. And it's not clear to me why that's not showing up. If that's should be a paid feature, which I'm not sure if it should be. That's also not showing up here as well. So that's something to look into. So all in all, I think it's a successful walkthrough. Wasn't as polished as I wanted it to be. Probably stumbled a few more times than I wanted to, but I think the point of doing these is to take a workflow end to end and see how easy or hard is it to do. And I think there's a fair amount of polish for us to make this better. So I hope you all enjoyed it. I know it was rather long. I appreciate you all watching, and I will probably do another one of these in another month or two to see how much better we can get. Thanks a lot.